is up? It is Dave. It is Duncan back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. For this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Swedish heavy rockers Greenleaf.
Did not have them from Sweden. I'm instantly handing my card in.
Okay.
Does make sense now that you've said it though.
The band's new album, The Head and the Habit, will be released on June 21st via Magnetic Eye Records. So, heavy rock aficionados Greenleaf were initially formed as an informal project by friends that were already playing in other bands, including such notable names as Dozer, Lowrider, and Demon Cleaner. The Swedes simply wanted an outlet for their mutual love of 70s era hard rock and proto-metal, while being free from the expectations and pressures of their main bands. Despite intentions to keep Greenleaf purely for pleasure, the undiluted joy of creating catchy songs led to everyone demanding for that material to be recorded.
Always happens. If there's no side project which is like, listen guys, we're all just going to get in a room.
Yeah.
We're just gonna, what happens in the room stays in the room.
Yeah.
It's all fine like that. You know, as soon as everyone starts smiling and nodding their head, it's going to get recorded. And as soon as it gets recorded, probably going to get toured. Yeah. So, it's a dangerous slope. We've all been there, Dave.
Yeah, that's true. This eventually resulted in the release of the self-titled debut EP in 2000, which was quickly followed by the first full-length Revolution Rock only a year later. With guitarist and founder Tommy Holapa firmly at the helm, the sound of Greenleaf remained remarkably consistent throughout the years and releases that followed, even though a variety of personnel changes. Having turned from an on and off fling to a full-time love affair, the years of rotating lineups ended, and Greenleaf's newfound focus and stability was crowned by their fifth album, Trails and Passes, in 2014, which featured new permanent vocalist Arvid Hallgaard. This milestone also marked the beginning of a new phase of the band. With their ninth full-length album, The Head and the Habit, Greenleaf have reached a pinnacle.
Bit of fun on the side. Ninth studio album. 20 years behind us.
Greenleaf have reached the pinnacle of a long evolution. The band explains that, as the album title implies, the new songs resemble symbolic short stories that revolve around emotional struggles and even mental illness. The album was recorded with Carl Daniel Leiden at Studio Gröndal in Stockholm, with additional vocals recorded by Arvid at Studio Baking Cabin. The album was also mixed and mastered by Carl Daniel Leiden in Trilam Studios in Stockholm. The album is 9 tracks long and has a runtime of about 43 minutes. So, Greenleaf, were you a Greenleaf guy before, or is this completely new?
It's completely new to me.
Oh,
so, yeah.
Interesting.
Not a band that was on my radar, and actually, I had them as American.
Oh, okay.
But interestingly enough, at least 2 of the bands I cite as influences on their sound are Swedish, so it does kind of make sense when you say it that way. And when I think about it, actually does kind of make sense.
Okay.
I'll just leave it at that and not go picking any further, Dave.
I dabbled in Greenleaf.
Of course you have,
Dabbled in
early 2000s.
I mean, I wouldn't claim to be someone that knows their back catalogue inside out, but I've enjoyed, what I've heard in the past. So, what do we think of album number 9? What did you make of this one? Being a newbie to Greenleaf, what did you make of this?
Well, it doesn't surprise me that they've got several albums behind them. This is about as assured a sound on an album I've heard in recent times, where just every single song just sounds like this is what we do. And you get slight variations around it, but this is what we do. Which is not a bad thing at all. So the kind of 70s rock, kind of proto-rock thing they've said is an influence is also kind of underpinned with kind of swaths of like kind of late 70s, early 80s American desert rock and stoner rock as well. So you get like this almost an amalgam sound of bands like The Sword, bands like Graveyard, bands like Witchcraft. There's a little bit of Witchcraft in there. Bands like Queens of the Stone Age, there's a bit of that in there. Clutch, there's a bit of that in there, and it's all kind of like a massage together. And then produced
Swedish massaged?
a Swedish massage, and that's one without the happy ending, Dave. Easy now. So like that, you kind of get elements of all those bands, but at their core, what they are is a band that knows how to deliver like these kind of massive rock licks with these little flurries at the end of almost every riff. There's a kind of or all these little bits that just kind of it exudes personality all the way right through it. It's just like guys, you get the image of like just people jamming a song until like you can put all those little elements in, which are personality, which I love. Vocally, it kind of sounds a lot like the Sword. So the Sword vocalist, but by way of a little bit of Neil Fallon in the higher register from Clutch, and there's a little bit of Graveyard minus the harsher tones. The Graveyard vocalist does more of that kind of soul-y sound. That's in there as well. The production's really interesting on this because I hear it going for a kind of more authentic sound in the guitars. Like overall, the guitars have a kind of tinny thinness to them at times. It's kind of radio sound, which I really, really, really like. Yeah. But it can beef up pretty quick.
Yeah.
And it belies those moments where when the whole band sink in for a big groove riff, it sounds heavy. But you can meander through a verse riff with this kind of very thin sounding, like kind of desert rocky guitar thing, and vocals which have like they have a reverb to them, but they're also like the singer does sound like he's like about this far off his mic and doing a lot of this, like kind of his voice throws a lot in really interesting ways. It once again adds character and depth. There's a lot of sides to what this band do. So like as you work your way through it, like I say, at its central core, they have their own sound, their Greenleaf sound, but the ways they will work their way to get to them are really interesting. So like opening track Breathe Breathe Out has a what I would class as the very archetype of what the sound of the album actually is at its core. But by the time you're through Different Horses or even A Wolf in My Mind, you get real kind of swaths of like little bits of Mastodon creeps in, you know, like kind of Mastodon kind of around the Hunter era where they were experimenting a little bit more with those kind of 70s vibes, a little bits of Black Sabbath style vocals and stuff. You know, that's kind of peppered through, and it's a bit more engaging. They have a track which I at first thought was, right, this is the instrumental track that gives us breath, called The Obsidian Grin, which is fucking awesome. It's stripped right back. It's a kind of ballady, bluesy track. And it does play mostly instrumental until this like huge kind of, you know, this kind of almost folksy style melody kicks in. And it works really well, you know, culminating in that The Obsidian Grin as a lyric. And then you get the back half of the album where the band just like continue to switch things up. The thing about Greenleaf is they're deceptively heavy. Like if you listen to this with volume, when they hit like a big intro riff or a big like interlude riff or a huge chorus, the bass sound like elevates everything up. You get this huge swath. I think that's their dynamic. That's what's interesting about them. They don't ever really strip down and go too clean in any part. It's just elements move out. So when they all come together, you get that lift, which is traditionally how bands became. Like you listen to Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath is heavy because the moments where everyone is synced in together sound huge. The moments where things pull back, there was no fuckery in there. There was no additional elements, and they kind of stick true to that, which makes it really interesting. I got to the end of this one, and I found that I'd been smiling a lot throughout. It's a very difficult album not to like. If I had any real gripe, I don't think Greenleaf necessarily do anything that I haven't heard numerous bands, I mentioned like 5 in the intro, numerous bands have done before, but like in this genre of music, maybe moreover than any other genre, there's a comfort to that. Like I don't want like like a gent style breakdown in the middle of one of these songs. You know, I don't want a fucking Knock Loose two-step breakdown in the middle of the. I don't want anything to go blackened. I just like with this genre of music, you kind of just want it to kind of toe the line, and the Head and the Habit kind of toes the line really, really, really well. It very rarely puts a foot wrong in any direction. I think maybe one or two songs is slightly long, but if there's not a genre of metal that shouldn't allow you to do that, I don't know. Like this one particularly is designed for bands to go long and go spacey and go weird and go trippy. It's kind of what it's there for. Doesn't always work for me, but it's so well put together. Just like it exudes confidence from start to finish. They'd be really interesting to see live. Like I've seen Graveyard live now. I've seen Witchcraft live as well. I've seen Clutch and The Sword live. I've seen all the bands I mentioned live. And I'll tell you one thing about all those bands are fucking killer live because they kind of have to be. I have no doubt in my mind that Greenleaf would be killer live, and I would very much look forward to hearing some of these songs sometime soon live on the stage. Yeah, it's a really well put together album. But like just one of those ones where it's like, and there's very little you can poke holes at all in the Head and the Habit.
As I said, I kind of listened to their albums kind of on and off throughout their career, and their releases tend to kind of sway between, you know, they've got albums which are more kind of heavy and stompy and, you know, are a bit more retro sound, a bit more 70s, or they lean more into the bluesy side, or something a bit more kind of soulful. But there's always something along the way that will grab your attention on their albums. However, I don't think a Greenleaf album has ever grabbed me as instantly as the Head and the Habit does. There's something even more infectious about this album that I don't think Greenleaf have ever been able to kind of sustain for a full album like they have on this one. And that punchy opening of Breathe, Breathe Out really had me kind of pulled in from that first chorus. It's a track that's the theme of it is kind of set around like optimism, like I suppose as a as hard as this is, it's all going to be okay type thing. It's got a killer hook, a really, really awesome kind of driving kind of rhythm to it. And as you said, it's got that kind of like authenticity in the production that just kind of sold it to me even more. We heard Graveyard do something similar on their last release where they went really retro and organic, and it just kind of oozes from that production and kind of seals the deal, to be honest. And I think Greenleaf have nailed it here. I've heard them go more kind of metallic in the past on some of the previous releases to kind of suit the heavier sound, but I think here they've captured a sound that really enhances the kind of selection of sounds they went for on this album. What I found most interesting about this album was the fact that this release covers some very heavy themes, like you're talking like mental illness, cancer, death, but as an album, it's still hugely catchy. And they aren't
all the way through, Dave.
Yeah, I know. And they aren't, like, if you listen to the lyrics, they aren't happy songs lyrically or thematically, but they deliver them in a way that feels the opposite of that. And to me, like the catchiest, I think this is the catchiest Greenleaf album they've put out to date. Every song has a hook that just kind of gets stuck in your head from the first listen. The first two tracks are just like absolutely overflowing with vocal melodies. But even when the tracks aren't primarily focused on like a big chorus, a track like Different Horses, for example, which is about someone that has cancer, who's kind of trying to deal with the repercussions of that physically and mentally. It's still got like a hook in there, but I like the fact they made more focused on telling a story rather than just a big kind of sing-along chorus. I thought that was quite clever. Every track feels like it has that bit of identity though, whether that's in the arrangement, the way they kind of start or finish a song, or even the kind of amount of dynamics that they use throughout songs as well, or even as an album as a whole. I think the way they've laid the album out has a great flow to it, but also a great variation in the way they've placed some of the kind of softer moments throughout the album just to keep it balanced. I think the Obsidian Grin is just an incredible kind of soulful centerpiece to the album. It's stripped right back, heavily blues laced. It feels very live, to be honest. It's got a kind of rawness to it that you can't help but be kind of like stopped in your tracks by. And I think Arvid's vocals on that track, you can hear they're a little bit rougher in texture, which kind of adds to the whole vibe of that track. He actually, when I was listening to that, it reminded me weirdly of Manuel from Zealand Ardor. Like when he goes like more soulful for some reason, I was picking up kind of similar kind of vibes. But it's also perfectly placed as the end of side A of the album when you do the old vinyl flip, and then it kicks back into action with the siren sound, which like it kind of like when that track kicked in, it kind of sounded like a siren to begin with. I was like, is that a siren or is it a guitar? I couldn't quite make it out, but then eventually I was like, all right, it's a guitar. But
Graveyard do something similar on that album that we got the first time around. I can't remember. Lights Out? Is it Lights Out?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the opening track opens with, if you listen to it, you're like that fucking air raid siren, and no, it's a guitar.
They do kind of something similar. But that moment in the middle of the album to me just kind of solidified the fact that an album like this should be listened to as a whole kind of experience, just so you're experiencing those changes in dynamic range throughout the album. The tracks are great as singles, but actually hearing them together paired up against tracks that are different in tone is much more rewarding, I felt. One of my favourite moments on the album was O Dandelion, which just has such a groove. My God, there's like you mentioned Sabbath. There's some like early Sabbath tones in here for sure, but it's got that kind of Greenleaf bluesy kind of swagger to it as well. The drums sound phenomenal. I agree with you on the production. Like some of this sounds very kind of like retro and throwback, but then like things like if you listen to the snare tone, that is not typical for a kind of stoner rock, kind of retro rock blues album. It's got a real crack to the snare, which you wouldn't normally expect, but by God, like it works on that track. It just kind of drives it along. It's really cool. That then leads into the Tricking Tree, which is the longest track on the album, 8 minutes 15, I think. And I kind of, when I saw that, I thought, all right, this is going to be the more experimental track of the album, and it is. It's it's compositionally longer, and they do go a bit more into kind of like jamming kind of territory on that one as the track enters its kind of second half. But actually, the first half of the track does have a structure to it and a hook to it as well. I love the kind of like these kind of like dramatic kind of tom kind of stabs, and they strip it right back musically when that kicks in the chorus, so it lets the kind of vocal really kind of stand out in that space, which I thought was really cool. A real kind of standout moment. I wasn't 100% sure of its placement. I kind of thought it might have been better slightly earlier in the album, because I do feel like the tail end of the album maybe isn't quite as strong as the front part of the album. The last two tracks are like heavily bluesy and a bit more psychedelic, and I think it maybe could have had a stronger finish if you compare to what we've had, earlier in the album. I don't think it's quite as attention grabbing, but it's something different, So if you're into the more kind of trippier, kind of jammy, kind of psychedelic side, then you might enjoy that kind of end of the album more than I did. That last part aside, I think this is a bitchin' album. Like, it's got a ton of character, really good hooks, despite its like darker themes, and the production is like perfectly crafted to suit that kind of earthy, kind of stoner rock kind of vibe they've got going on. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this. One of the hookiest Greenleaf albums I've heard from so far. So, final thing, what we're thinking scores for this album. What you think?
Yeah, it's a great album. Like I say, difficult to put calls in. I think there's occasionally one or two songs which have elements that run a bit long for me overall, but not in a bad way. It's just I would maybe do them a little bit shorter if I was the one writing the music, which I clearly am not. Production's great, flows really well as an album. First time I've listened to them, yes, it does remind me of lots of other acts. A 4, I think, is fair for this one. Definitely worth checking out, and like I say, I would be very curious to see them live. So I'm going at 4.
Yep. Yeah, I'd agree. A very strong release from Greenleaf, and I love that they're still getting better. Like every release seems to kind of improve a bit, and I think this one shows like what they are capable of in terms of their songwriting, and their hooks are incredible on this album. Like really catchy stuff. Really like the production as well. I think they've got a really good balance on the production in this one. And like yourself, I'd love to see it live. I haven't seen these guys live before, but I'd 100% check them out live if they end up in Scotland at some point. I shall be there. So it's a 4 out of 5 for me as well. It's the new Greenleaf album, The Head and the Habit, out on Magnetic Eye Records on June 21st. Links below to the band, to the pre-order, Bandcamp, all that stuff. Check it out, have a listen, see what you think. That is the review. Thank you for checking it out, much appreciated. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Breathe.